It's different this time, especially when it comes to altcoins. Yes, that's my opinion, and I'll show you why. Just take a look at the Bitcoin dominance here. Back then, Bitcoin dominance dropped over a 12-month period. That's how it was in the 2017 cycle. For 12 months, we saw a decline in Bitcoin dominance. That was the time when altcoins really performed well. Then we had a nice Bitcoin season for 34 months, followed by another 9 months of altcoin season. Now we've already been in a Bitcoin season for 43 months. That's also the reason why altcoins are still completely stuck in a bear market. But the big problem is that in the past, we've always reached our Bitcoin top about 500 to 600 days after the halving, usually towards the end of the year. If that's the case again this time, then our altcoin window is simply getting smaller day by day. That means we now have at most the chance to enjoy a good altcoin period for maybe 4 or 5 more months. And right now, we're not there yet. If we do see an altcoin season, it will probably be more compact, faster, but also more explosive, though it definitely won't last as long. That's just a fact, because so far we can clearly see that it used to be a bit different. Now, it will probably just happen faster, but when it does, a lot will happen all at once. We can see this here too using the elite wave analysis. Here we simply have a very clear pattern. In 5 cases, we moved up properly, and in the ABC we corrected. This chart mainly concerns the altcoins. Here, it's important to understand when we are in an altcoin season. If we have this proper upward movement here, we're in a nice altcoin season for the altcoins. If we have the strong correction, of course, we're in a Bitcoin season. That's how it was in the past. And if we compare this here, we can clearly see that we've already been in a Bitcoin season for quite a long time now. But at this point, let me tell you, if we get a nice 5-wave upward movement here, it only makes sense that around wave 3 or 4 in this area, we should immediately start thinking about selling, because that's how we've risen in the past as well. We really moved up here perfectly according to the Elliott wave pattern, and then went into an ABC correction perfectly following the Elliott pattern. Currently, however, we still haven't seen the big breakout of the altcoins compared to Bitcoin. And that's something that still needs to happen here. But I think it could happen, because we're slowly starting to see a shift. We're seeing signs that Ethereum may have found its bottom, and it could be that Ethereum will slowly start to outperform Bitcoin in the long term. Ethereum still sets the tone for the entire altcoin sector. All in all, though, everything once again depends on the M2 money supply. If the M2 money supply increases, the altcoin sector rises as well. We've just seen this again. The M2 money supply received a lot of liquidity, and we're also seeing gains in the altcoins. And currently, the M2 money supply is still moving in the right direction. So from that perspective, things are looking pretty good here. However, from a global economic perspective, we are still in risky times. We can see this especially in the price of gold. The higher the price of gold rises, the greater the level of fear. But if we see a reversal in gold, we immediately see a rotation into the crypto market, especially into altcoins. So a correction in gold means an upward trend for Bitcoin. Here, I'm particularly watching this zone. If we drop below $3,100 in gold, money will gradually start to shift, and we'll see more and more liquidity coming in. So you should definitely keep an eye on the gold chart here. But above all, you should also watch Ethereum, because if we start seeing larger candles in Ethereum again, we'll know right away that money is also starting to shift back in. But what I've especially noticed is that at different times, we simply have different assets that perform well. Of course, that's not really anything new. We've seen in the past as well that different assets perform at different times. But here I've identified a very clear pattern. Whenever we're in wave 3 here, it's mainly the larger altcoins that perform. And in the final upswing, it's more the small caps. I'll show you this. Here we had this major upward trend. That's when projects like XRP performed especially well. You can see that here in the background, that was mainly the time when XRP was performing. In the next upward trend, even though the crypto market rose higher, XRP didn't perform quite as strongly anymore. The same goes for Chainlink. Let's take a look at that. Chainlink performed much better in the first half than in the second. But if we look at small caps now, a project like Dusk, it performed better, especially in the second half. PenPen was also much smaller back then and performed better in the second half. Secret was also a small cap and also performed significantly better in the second half. That means we have a very clear pattern of when and how the altcoins perform, above all. In the third wave, it's mainly the larger altcoins, and in the last quarter, it's mostly the small caps and low caps. That's exactly when they perform. And that's also the point when at the very latest you should completely exit here. There's no benefit in holding through the bear market. The question, of course, is from what point are we so overheated that we absolutely have to sell? Quite clearly, when we cross the purple line on the P-cycle top indicator, then we are definitely in the overheated zone and should start thinking about selling. The P-cycle top indicator has always proven itself, but in my opinion, there are much more meaningful indicators that suggest the market first needs to correct and that we are overheated. Every time we move into the green here, the market becomes euphoric and really risk hungry. And the greener it gets, the more cautious we should become. Because the higher it goes, the greater the risk of a major correction. This indicator is extremely meaningful. I would have liked to show you how this looked during the last bull run, because back then everything was really deep in the green, and that's when you have to exit completely. The higher we are here in the green zone, the more you need to sell. It's exactly the same with the funding rate. If the funding rate looks like it did at the top of the last bull run, really going crazy, then that's when you really need to think about selling, because at that point we're really high up and the likelihood of a major correction is much greater. That's exactly how it's always been in the past. We broke our all-time high here, we climbed even higher in the funding rate, and then the market makers stepped in again. Because every time we rise this high in the funding rate, the market makers eventually intervene. The higher we are here, the more severe the crash will be. You can basically keep that in mind, because the funding rate simply shows how over-leveraged the market is in one direction or the other. And during the euphoria phase, the market is sometimes just too irrationally over-leveraged in one direction, and then it just completely crashes. That's always the reason why we actually saw a 50% correction within just a few weeks back then, because the market was too over-leveraged. That's why you absolutely have to pay attention to these two indicators. The greener the premium indicator is, the more likely a crash becomes. The higher the funding rate, the harder we will fall and the more cautious you need to be. I also summarized this for you once, where I clearly showed you which assets perform at which percentage of Bitcoin dominance. The higher the Bitcoin dominance, the better the larger altcoins tend to perform. The lower the Bitcoin dominance, the more interesting the low caps become. This way, you can also adjust your exit strategy. For example, you could say, hey, I'll sell my mid caps when we're at 54 to 48% Bitcoin dominance. In that range, I sell my mid caps. If we then drop below 48% Bitcoin dominance, that's when I'll sell the remaining low caps, and by 42% at the latest, we should be completely out. So this is another way you could exit the market, and you could use it as an exit strategy. Because as I said, based on past data, it was very clear that when Bitcoin dominance drops, the money first shifts into Ethereum and the mid caps, and only at the very end do the altcoins get a piece of the pie. I just showed you that again as well, and I hope you enjoyed this altcoin video. I hope you were able to learn how and when to sell your altcoins, because buying is easy, but selling is much harder. As always, leave a like and a comment, and see you next time, friends. Ciao!